let me ask you this. Why is it that so many people who would oppose the use of Talmud Bavi, the Talmud, will support the book of Enoch in the very same breath? Let me give you some context here, okay? I was recently talking to a gentleman, a Gentile who's coming into the Messianic Jewish world. He's still learning the ropes. He has a lot of questions still. And he's talking to me about some Jewish traditions that he didn't agree with, and I was explaining to him where they come from. And you could tell he's getting flustered. And he looks at me and he says, well, you people are the ones who decided the book of Enoch shouldn't be in the Bible. I love it when I'm a you people. It shows you that at the heart of, like, especially Hebrew roots mentality teachings is deep-seated anti-Semitism. They want to wear Jewish clothing. They want to redefine our customs, laws, ways of life, and it's a method of replacing us. But that's beside the point. And he says, you people are the ones who decided the book of Enoch doesn't belong in the Bible. And I think to myself, oh, the irony. One moment you're sola scriptura, and therefore you can't listen to Talmud, but in the next breath you're telling me that the book of Enoch should be in the Bible. I know not everyone who, I know most people don't hold the book of Enoch. But I got to thinking about it. And it's a very interesting connection. Because I think a lot of people, when they entered into the Messianic Jewish world, they sense something is missing. The Talmud can't be right, because we've heard from YouTube preachers that that's evil. But the Torah seems to have a lot of cases where it's not specific. There's a lot of situations where the Torah could go either direction, or you can interpret it a number of ways, and you just don't know what to do with it, or how do laws apply where it kind of falls, situations fall between laws. And rather than look at the Talmud, they start looking for supplemental material, like the book of Enoch, the book of Jasher. And the thing I would say to that is, don't look for a sensational faith. Okay, when I look at the book of Enoch and the book of Jasher, you can tell I'm about to go to war on this one. And I'm sorry, I'll get into the strengths of these books in a little bit, but when I look at these books, it reminds me of Dan Brown, I think, the author of the Da Vinci Code. He was more popular maybe a decade or two ago, but he wrote a book called the Da Vinci Code that kind of uses the Bible. It's kind of sensational. It's fictional. It's got conspiracies and organizations that control the world. It's very, it's fun, but it's not biblical. It's not written by a theologian. I'd actually say it's anti-biblical. And when I look at things like the book of Enoch, I get the same sense of fun. It's got angels and demons and genealogies of giants and tours of the afterlife. It's very interesting. You can see why it was so popular in the first century. But that doesn't mean it should be scripture. Indeed, at the Council of, we'll say Jamnia, they rolled it out. And then the church forefathers, they also knew about this book, and they also rolled it out. And it's and everyone has their different criteria. The Council of Jamnia had 4 standards. I think the church fathers did too. But I think part of the reason why people are so much more apt to grab onto books like Enoch and reject Talmud is because the accessibility. You see, Enoch is fun. It's interesting. It's a trip, and I do like it. I mean, it's interesting. And it does show the first century point of view of the afterlife and things like that pretty well. But entering the Talmud, it's not the same. People will come to me and say, well, the Talmud says this and this and this. And I'll say, okay, did you read the next paragraph? You see, what makes the Talmud interesting is it's not a collection of beliefs. What makes the Talmud so interesting is it is a stylized conversation. It's a conversation between what would basically be like the modern day equivalent of a lawyer. These are people who really know their law. You see, for them, Torah is not just scripture, it's not just personal, it's not just religion, it is their legal code, their whole way of life. And they know the entire Torah by heart in Hebrew, and they're able to pick out the nuances of it. And it's these incredibly advanced sages who are having discussions and arguments. And so the thing about the Talmud is you have to look at where the conversation leads. You can't just take one passage and say, well, this is what the Talmud says. Okay, it does say that. What does the next guy say? What does the next guy say? What does it mean when the sages agree on one thing, but, Rabbi Akiva says something else? One person versus a group of people. These are things you have to be able to look at. And very often I just say, okay, flip, flip, flip. This is where the conversation ends. And they look at it and they're like, oh, well, that's completely different. And I say, I know. The conversation doesn't end with, so-and-so saying something horrible. He might have said something horrible, and then they might have disagreed with him, and usually we end up in a pretty healthy place because we have a conversation and we have a method for getting where we get. But you see, that's hard and that's inaccessible because it's advanced and you have to go through a process, a journey to get there. It's a lot more easy just to go pick up the Book of Enoch and talk about giants and talk about the Nephilim and all that stuff, which I think did exist probably. I'm sorry, the giants. Obviously, the Nephilim exist. But it takes a lot more investment. But I'll say it like this. If you've ever been to a lawyer's office, I know you'll see it. A whole wall of law and case studies. One case study after another, after another, after another. I don't know if they've ever read it all, but they know where to find their information. That's Talmud. Case study after case study after case study. How do we apply this? The Book of Enoch is that Dan Brown novel. It's a lot more accessible to read the novel, but it's a lot better for your brain to try to access the Talmud. To be able to, I'm not just talking about the Talmud, but to do work with the sages. To be able to engage with the great fathers of our faith. Because they'll make you think in ways you've never had to think before. They'll make you think of situations you've never had to think of before. And you might not agree with everything they say, but of course you won't. It's a conversation. It's an argument. You can't agree with everyone in an argument. You have to see where this thing ends. And you may still not agree with it. But the way we get to our conclusions is actually more important in Talmud Bavli than the actual conclusions we come to sometimes. How do we get there? And that's very interesting to me. And I would encourage you, if you've never ventured down the road of Talmud Bavli, if you've never engaged with the sages, don't do it alone. That's a way to mess it up. Because it's advanced. It's really hard. Sign up with an Orthodox rabbi. A Daf Yomi course at the JCC might be, assuming the person's Orthodox, or a really good Messianic Jewish rabbi. Like, I love First Fruits of Zion. There's no secret about that. I've read like all of Aaron Yeeby's books. Or Shapira, Yitzhak Shapira. He's very good with Talmud. He's the author of The Kosher Pig, and he's a Messianic Jewish rabbi. And these are just a few names I'm thinking of off the top of my head, where these are the people that you want to go to. The people who really have had to get into this and get into the little details of it. I would not engage with it on my own. And I encourage you, if you are in Messianic Judaism and you want to grow in your faith and in this expression, please really do not just dismiss Talmud. Because it's got the conversations that helped shape Judaism for the next 2,000 years. And it's true, books like Enoch can give us a glimpse into first century points of view, but I would argue the Talmud is much better in that capacity. Because you see, Talmud is a range of authors. Many voices contribute to this from the 1st, 2nd, 3rd centuries, really up until about the 5th. Many people contribute to this. That's many points of view. It's a much more thorough glimpse at first century life. Not that the books like Enoch aren't valuable in that regard, but I would say that Talmud, Midrash, a lot of these books are a lot more thorough in understanding the worldview of the apostles, of the Talmudim, and of course, Yeshua HaMashiach himself, and lots of the conversations he was engaging with at the time. So I just thought I'd put that out there. Do with what you will. And just like I said with Talmud Bavli, you don't have to agree with me. But I'd like us to think about why we want to agree with me. Shabbat Shalom.